So Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to our Sunday session. We're going to continue with chapter 4, where the Lord has been speaking about different types of sacrifices. Before we begin, let's chant the Mangalacharan. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpadarupyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyata Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gauravakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukham karoti vachalam pangum langayate giram yat kripa tamaham vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. So Hare Krishna devotees, I think 2 weeks back we covered 2 shlokas in chapter 4, which was shlokas 25 and 26. So let's just look at different types of sacrifices that the Lord has been speaking about. So we discussed that Krishna's explanations of the various kinds of sacrifices is very, very broad. So, and we talked about how all sacrifices and yajnas must actually be performed in Krishna consciousness so that it doesn't bind us. But because we all have different levels of consciousness, different levels of interests, different levels of understanding, then according to our level of consciousness, we tend to perform different types of sacrifices. Now, so everything depends on the purity of our heart, the purity of our intent. And it's only natural that those who have a deeper understanding of what sacrifices really mean, they can achieve the topmost sacrifice, which is we called Atmahuti, which is offering one's soul to the Supreme Lord. Essentially offering your consciousness to Krishna so that Krishna can own your consciousness. This is actually complete surrender to the Supreme Lord. So Krishna has said that if we don't perform our duties, it's a sin. But even if we perform our duties as per the scriptures, it entangles us. But if we give up our material dharma and take shelter of spiritual dharma, then that is not considered sinful. And we talked about the 5 debts that each of us owes. So when we take birth, And when we appear in this universe, we are coming with a whole lot of baggage. One baggage is your own karma that you've performed in your past life. And the second one is the debt that you owe to the 5 different personalities. The first one being the demigods. If the demigods didn't supply us with the rain and water and heat and sunshine and everything else, then our life would not be very comfortable. So the first debt all of us owe is to the 33 crore demigods. The second debt that we owe is to all the rishis, the sages, who have set forth a path for us to follow. The third debt we owe is to our ancestors. The fourth debt that we owe is to all the other human beings. And the fifth debt that we owe is to all the other jivatmas. So the demigods, the sages, the rishis, the ancestors, other human beings, and other jivatmas. And the entire varnashrama system is set up in such a way it helps you pay down your debt. Now, you and I would have never thought we have taken a loan from all these people. When did we take that loan? Well, just by the process of just occupying this body, we have accrued debt. But Krishna says, if we surrender to him, then all the debts to these 5 different types of personalities is wiped out. And why should any one of us want to actually carry this debt around if you know you can pay it off in one shot simply by surrendering to Krishna? However, because we have different levels of consciousness, we perform different levels of sacrifices. So there are 12 kinds of sacrifices that the Lord is talking about in chapter 4. We covered Shloka number 24, probably 4 weeks back. This Shloka number 24 is the highest form of sacrifice, which is it is called the Brahma Yajna, sacrificing of yourself. Here, Prabhupada has translated as a person who is completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness. Right? So when we use the word yajna, we typically think of fire sacrifices. Anything that you offer in the fire gets consumed. But what about the spiritual fire? The spiritual fire consumes your material desires and your general tendency to be indisciplined. So that fire of self-discipline actually burns up the desires of the senses. One way is to artificially control it. The other way is to actually engage your senses in a positive way. So there is a way in which you can negate your senses, and there is a way in which you can engage your senses. Negating your senses is what Jnana Yoga and Dhyana Yoga is about. Engaging your senses is what Bhakti Yoga is all about. Engaging our senses is a far more natural thing for us to do, because the other one requires a tremendous amount of willpower. And because it requires a tremendous amount of willpower, it comes with certain assumed risk of failure. Whereas simply engaging your senses in serving Krishna has very little risk, because it's a natural thing for you to do. So let's look at the Probably we can look at the different types of yajnas that Krishna has talked about so far. So if you look at Shloka 24, a person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. The technical term for this is Brahma Jnana Yajna, which is offering your entire being to Krishna. It's the highest form of sacrifice. And as I mentioned, Srila Prabhupada translates this to Bhakti Yoga. In the next shloka, Krishna says some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them, and some offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. So in shloka 25, the Lord is talking about Deva Yajna, which is worshipping the demigods. And if you look at the next shloka 26, some, the unadulterated brahmacharis, sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control, and others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. So this is called, there are two sacrifices mentioned in shlokas 26. One is the Indriya Samyama Yajna, which means to sacrifice your senses in the service of the Lord. And the other sacrifice which the householders do is Vishaya Grahana Yajna, which is to offer the objects of the senses itself as a sacrifice. Which brings us to shloka number 27 today. I think we have to do 27 or 26. Just give me 1 second. Let me just check my records. So we did up to 26 last time. So let's look at shloka 27. So, but before we go there, let's just talk about the other sacrifices. So, so far we've looked at 4 different sacrifices: Brahma Jnana Yajna, Deva Yajna, Indriya Samyama Yajna, and Vishaya Grahana Yajna. So the 5th one, which is in shloka 27, is called the Atma Samyama Yajna, which is a combination of your senses, sense objects, and your mind and everything else. Its sum total of 26 is in 27 shloka. So in the 28th shloka, the Lord is saying, we'll just read the 27th. Others who are interested in achieving self-realization through the control of the mind and senses offer the functions of all the senses and of the life breath as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. So this is Atma Samyama Yajna. In shloka 28, having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions. So the sacrificing the possessions is called Dravya Yajna. Dravya Yajna, you could say, is possessions or wealth. So you offer your possessions back as a sacrifice. And others by performing severe austerities. This is Tapo Yajna. By practicing the yoga of 8-fold mysticism. This is Yoga Yajna, which is the Ashtanga Yoga. Then the 9th type of yajna is the studying of the Vedic scriptures, which is called Swadhyaya Yajna. And the purpose of doing this Swadhyaya is to advance in the knowledge about the divine That is called Jnana Yajna. So in Shloka 28, 5 different types of yajnas are described. Dravya Yajna, Tapo Yajna, Yoga Yajna, Swadhyaya Yajna, and Jnana Yajna. And that leaves us with 2 more yajnas, which is in Shloka 29. This is called Pranayama Yajna. Still others who are inclined to the process of breath restraint to remain in trance, practice by offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming and the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. So that is Pranayama Yajna. And the last one is in the last sentence. Others, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. This is Ahara Niyama Yajna, which is curtailing, being very regulated about your eating habits. So let's go to Shloka 27 today. Please recite after me. Sarvan Indriya Karmani.
Sarvan Indriya Karmani.
Prana Karmani Chapare.
Prana Karmani Chapare.
Atma Samyama Yogaghnau.
Samyama Yogagno.
Juhvate Jnana Deepite.
Dipite.
Sarvan Indriya Karmani.
Sarvan Indriya Karmani.
Prana Karmani Chapare.
Karmani Chapare.
Atma Samyama Yogaghnau.
Yogagno.
Juhvate Jnana Deepite.
Dipite.
Sarvani Indriya Karmani.
Indriya Karmani.
Prana Karmani Chapare.
Karmani Chapare.
Atma Samyama Yogaghnau.
Samyama Yogagno.
Juhvate Jnana Deepite. Word for word meaning and translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. My one request is for those who have background noise, you can please mute yourself. It's a little disturbing. Thank you. Sarvani. Of all. Indriya. The senses. Karmani. Functions. Prana Karmani. Functions of the life breath. Cha. Also. Apare. Others. Atma Samyama. Of controlling the mind. Yoga. The linking process. Aghnau. In the fire off. Jukvati. Offer. Jnana Deepite. Because of the urge for self-realization. Translation. Others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and senses offer the functions of all the senses
offer
the
the
functions of
functions of
all the
all
senses
senses
and of the life breath
and
and
of
of
life
life
as oblations
as oblations
into the fire of the controlled mind.
into the fire of the
controlled
controlled
mind.
mind.
Perfect. The yoga system conceived by Patanjali is referred to herein. In the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, the soul is called Pratyagatma and Parag Atma. As long as the soul is attached to sense enjoyment, it is called Parag Atma. The word raga means attachment. So Parag Atma means you're attached to something that's external to you. But as soon as the same soul becomes detached from such sense enjoyment, it is called Pratyagatma, which is you are detached from things external to you and you are going inward. The soul is subjected to the functions of 10 kinds of air at work within the body. And this is perceived through the breathing system. The Patanjali system of yoga instructs one on how to control the functions of the body's air in a technical manner so that ultimately all the functions of the air within become favorable for purifying the soul of material attachment. According to this yoga system, Pratyagatma is the ultimate goal. This Pratyagatma is withdrawn from activities in matter. The senses interact with the sense objects, like the ear for hearing, eyes for seeing, nose for smelling, tongue for tasting, and hand for touching. And all of them are thus engaged in activities outside the self. They are called the functions of the prana vayu. The apana vayu goes downwards. Vyana vayu acts to shrink and expand. Samana vayu adjusts equilibrium. Udana vayu goes upwards. And when one is enlightened, one engages all these in searching for self-realization. So this particular process of yoga, this Ashtanga yoga, is really meant to regulate your physiological bodily functions in such a way that it puts you on the path of self-realization. And each of these, by the way, I was just reading up on this Vayus, and as per the Yoga Shastra, Vayu means wind. It also means that which flows. So there are 149 distinct type of Vayus, of which 5 are considered main. They are called the Panchapranas, which is what Srila Prabhupada is talking about here. So this Prana Vayu has to do with air. The Apana Vayu is linked to earth. The Vyana Vayu is linked to water. The Samana Vayu is linked to fire, and Udana Vayu is linked to ether. And these different Vayus act in different parts of the body. For example, the Prana Vayu is in the heart region. It's the energy that pervades your entire chest area. Similarly, the Apana Vayu is residing in your pelvic region. So these are considered the Panchapranas. So we don't need to get into the technical aspect of this because we are actually practicing Bhakti Yoga. But the essential thing here is that if you are practicing Dhyana Yoga, you have to learn to control the flow of air within your body until everything gets neutralized and you are on that path of self-realization. So we'll move to the next shloka. Dravya yajna stapo yajna
Dravyayajnastapo yajna.
Yoga yajnastatha pare.
Yogayajnastatapare.
Swadhyaya jnana yajnascha.
Svadhyayajnanayajnascha.
Yataya samshita vrataha.
Yataya samshitavrataha.
Dravya yajnastapo yajna.
Dravyayajnastapo yajna.
Yoga yajnastatha pare.
Yogayajnastatapare.
Swadhyaya jnana yajnascha.
Svadhyayajnanayajnascha.
Yataya samshita vrataha.
Yataya samshitavrataha.
Dravya yajnastapo yajna.
Dravyayajnastapo yajna.
Yoga yajnastatha pare.
Yogayajnastatapare.
Swadhyaya jnana yajnascha.
Svadhyayajnanayajnascha.
Yataya samshita vrataha.
Yataya
Word for word meaning and translation. Dravya yajnaha. Sacrificing one's possessions.
sacrificing one's possessions.
Tapaha yajnaha.
Yajnaha,
Sacrifices on austerities.
sacrifice in austerities.
Yoga yajnaha.
Yoga yajnaha,
Sacrifice in eightfold mysticism.
sacrifice in eightfold mysticism.
Tatha.
Thus,
Thus. Apare.
Apare,
Others.
others,
Swadhyaya.
Svadhyaya,
Sacrifice in the study of the Vedas.
sacrifice in the study of Vedas.
Jnana yajnaha.
Yajnaha,
Sacrifice in advancement of transcendental knowledge.
sacrifice in advancement of transcendental knowledge.
Also.
Also,
Yatayaha. Enlightened persons.
enlightened persons.
Samshita vrataha.
Samshitavrataha,
Taken to strict vows.
taken to strict vows.
Translation. Having accepted strict vows,
Having accepted strict vows,
some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions,
sacrificing their possessions,
and others by
others
performing severe austerities,
by performing severe austerities,
by practicing the yoga
practicing the yoga
of eightfold mysticism,
eightfold mysticism,
or by studying the Vedas
or by studying the Vedas
to advance in transcendental knowledge.
advance in transcendental knowledge.
So as we said, there are 5 yajnas talked about here: Dravya yajna, Tapo yajna, Yoga yajna, Swadhyaya yajna, and Jnana yajna. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is writing, these sacrifices may be fitted into various divisions. There are persons who are sacrificing their possessions in the form of various kinds of charities. In India, the rich mercantile community or princely orders open various kinds of charitable institutions like Dharmashala, Annakshetra, Athitishala, Anathalaya, and Vidyapita. In other countries too, there are many hospitals, old age homes, and similar charitable foundations meant for distributing food, education, and medical treatment free to the poor. All these charitable activities are called Dravyamaya Yajna. There are others who, for higher elevation in life or for promotion to higher planets within the universe, voluntarily accept many kinds of austerities, such as Chandrayana and Chaturmasya. These processes entail severe vows for conducting life under certain rigid rules. For example, under the Chaturmasya vow, the candidate does not shave for 4 months during the year, July to October. He does not eat certain foods, does not eat twice in a day, or does not leave home. Such sacrifice of the comforts of life is called Tapomaya Yajna. There are still others who engage themselves in different kinds of mystic yogas, like Patanjali's system, for merging into the existence of the Absolute, or Hatha Yoga or Shtanga Yoga for particular perfections. And some travel to all the sanctified places of pilgrimage. All these practices are called Yoga Yajna, sacrifice for a certain type of perfection in the material world. There are others who engage themselves in the studies of different Vedic literatures, specifically the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutras or the Sankhya philosophy. All of these are called Swadhyaya Yajna, or engagement in the sacrifice of studies. All these yogis are faithfully engaged in different types of sacrifice and are seeking a higher status of life. Krishna consciousness, however, is different from these because it is the direct service of the Supreme Lord. Krishna consciousness cannot be attained by any one of the above mentioned types of sacrifice, but can be attained only by the mercy of the Lord and his bona fide devotees. Therefore, Krishna consciousness is transcendental. Srila Prabhupada does not wait for Krishna to come to Sloka 18.66. Prabhupada reveals the ultimate secret of the Bhagavad Gita in the very introduction to the Bhagavad Gita itself. Srila Prabhupada's concern was, in Kali Yuga, we have very little patience and determination to see through things in life. And therefore, even if one has to pick up a book like the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada's concern was, what if you don't reach 18.66? What if you give up reading after first chapter? He doesn't want you to miss out on the fact of what is Krishna ultimately telling us in the Bhagavad Gita. So repeatedly, Srila Prabhupada translates specific shlokas to incorporate Bhakti Yoga, so that those who are reading Srila Prabhupada's purport understand upfront what the ultimate conclusion is of Krishna. Which means these 12 different sacrifices that we talked about today, we have not finished shlokas, the next shloka, which covers the last 2 sacrifices. They are all an indirect way of connecting to Krishna. And therefore, you may or may not be successful. Therefore, Prabhupada is just concluding in the purport here that actually practicing Bhakti Yoga is very different from all of these different kinds of sacrifices, because you are directly engaged in serving the Lord. So ultimately here in these 12 different types of yajnas, Krishna is talking about minimizing our bodily needs and focusing on our spiritual goals. But Prabhupada is saying simply focusing on Krishna alone automatically gives you the result of minimizing your bodily needs and focusing on the spiritual, simply being connected to Krishna. So when sacrifices are directed towards the Lord himself directly, then that's the fastest way to purify our mind and senses, and thus it elevates your consciousness in a much faster manner. So the easiest path for us to elevate our consciousness is to be connected to Krishna directly. There's no need for us to engage ourselves in these various indirect processes of sacrifices when the topmost sacrifice is to engage your consciousness in thinking about Krishna. So the topmost sacrifice is to surrender your consciousness itself to Krishna. There's nothing above that. There is nothing above that. So these other types of sacrifices are graduated steps for you to get there, to surrender your consciousness to Krishna. Therefore, Prabhupada doesn't hesitate to bring the conclusion up front in the Bhagavad Gita to really let you know this is the simplest and easiest way, and this is the best choice that you could ever make in your life. You don't have to worry about studying the Vedic scriptures because that's very austere. You don't have to build big hospitals. You don't have to sacrifice your possessions because that's a big austerity. Not all of us can maintain or hope to even attain some of this kind of austerities that are performed. But anyway, we'll come to the last two types of sacrifices. Apane juhvate pranam.
Apane juhvati
Prane panam tatha pare.
Prane panam tatha pare
Pranapanagati ruddhava.
Pranapanagati ruddhva
Pranayama parayanaha.
Pranayama parayana
Apare niyataharaha.
Apare niyatara
Pranan praneshu juhvati.
Pranan praneshu juhvati
Apane juhvati pranam.
Apane juhvati pranam
Prane panam tatha pare.
Prane panam pare
Pranapanagati ruddhva.
Pranapanagati ruddhva
Pranayama parayanaha.
Pranayama parayana
Apare niyataharaha.
Apare niyatara
Pranan praneshu juhvati.
Pranan praneshu juhvati
Apane juhvati pranam.
Apane juhvati pranam
Prane panam tatha pare.
Prane panam tatha pare
Pranapanagati ruddhva.
Pranapanagati ruddhva
Pranayama parayanaha.
Pranayama parayana
Apare niyataharaha.
Apare niyatara
Pranan praneshu juhvati. So you would have noticed there are two extra lines in the shloka. That's because Srila Prabhupada has taken the first two lines of Shloka 30 and conjoined it with Shloka number 29 because it paints the complete picture. So let's look at the word for word meaning and translation. Apane,
Apane.
air which acts downward.
The air which acts downward.
Juhvati,
Juhvati.
offer.
Offer.
Pranam,
Pranam.
the air which acts outward.
The
Air which acts outward.
Prane,
Prane.
in the air going outward.
in the
In the air going outward.
Apanam,
Pranam.
air going downward.
the
Air going downward.
Tatha,
Tha.
as also.
As also.
Apare,
Re.
others.
Others.
Prana,
Prana.
the air going outward.
The air going outward.
Apana, and
Apana.
the air going downward.
The air going downward.
Gati,
Gati.
the movement.
The movement.
Rudhva,
Rudhva.
checking.
Checking.
Prana ayama,
Ayama.
trance induced by stopping all breathing.
Trance induced by stopping all breathing.
Parayanaha,
Ayana.
so inclined.
Inclined.
Apare,
Pare.
others.
Others.
Niyata,
Yatha.
having controlled.
Having control.
Aharaha,
Ahara.
eating.
Eating.
Pranan,
Prana.
the outgoing air.
Outgoing air.
Praneshu,
Praneshu.
in the outgoing air.
Outgoing air.
Juhvati,
Juhvati.
sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
Translation, still others
Still others
who are inclined to the process of breath restraint
who are inclined to the process of breath restraint
to remain in trance,
remain in trance,
practice
practice
by offering the movement
by offering the movement
of the outgoing breath
of the outgoing breath
into the incoming
into the incoming
and the incoming breath
and the incoming breath
into the outgoing,
the outgoing,
and thus at last
thus at last
remain in trance,
in trance,
stopping all breathing.
stopping all breathing.
Others
Curtailing
the eating process,
the eating process,
offer the outgoing breath
offer the outgoing breath
into itself
into itself
as a sacrifice.
as a sacrifice.
So in this particular shloka, the Lord is specifically talking about breath control, which is part of the Ashtanga Yoga. And the Lord is also talking about regulating your eating habits. So the last two sacrifices are in this particular shloka. As we mentioned, Prabhupada has taken two lines from shloka 30 and put it here, because with this particular shloka, the 12th sacrifice is completed. So one is pranayama yajna, and the other one is ahara niyama yajna. So in this particular purport, Srila Prabhupada is going to talk about the technical details of breath control. We'll read it. It's not essential for us to necessarily understand it, because at least I don't practice yoga, so I do not know. But I was reading up about it just out of curiosity. But let's read Srila Prabhupada's purport and see what Srila Prabhupada is saying. This system of yoga for controlling the breathing process is called pranayama. And in the beginning, it is practiced in the Hatha Yoga system through different sitting postures. All of these processes are recommended for controlling the senses and for advancement in spiritual realization. This practice involves controlling the airs within the body so as to reverse the directions of their passage. The apana air goes downward and the prana air goes up. The pranayama yogi practices breathing the opposite way until the currents are neutralized into puraka, equilibrium. Offering the exhaled breath into the inhaled breath is called rechaka. So rechaka means essentially when you breathe in and then you hold that breath without breathing out, I believe that is called rechaka. And this practice, I was reading, helps you increase your willpower and also helps you regulate your body. When both air currents are completely stopped, one is said to be in the Kumbhaka Yoga. So in the Kumbhaka, when you actually exhale and hold your exhalation without inhaling anymore, that is called Kumbhaka. And this helps you achieve that Brahman stage. By practice of Kumbhaka Yoga, one can increase the duration of life for perfection in spiritual realization. This yogic practice of controlling your breathing, by taking lesser breaths, you can actually increase your lifespan. So why do some yogis live for very, very long years? That's because they've learned to control their breathing. Actually, the Bhagavatam says, we are all given a certain number of breaths. Once that clock comes to 0, you're done, you're out. So by practice of Kumbhaka Yoga, one can increase the duration of life for perfection in spiritual realization. Because to practice Dhyana Yoga, you need a long lifetime. One way to get your long lifetime is to learn to control your breathing. The intelligent yogi is interested in attaining perfection in one life without waiting for the next. For by practicing Kumbhaka Yoga, the yogis increase the duration of life by many, many years. And Srila Prabhupada comes to Krishna consciousness. A Krishna conscious person, however, being always situated in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, automatically becomes the controller of the senses. Conclusion is, you don't have to pursue a very difficult path. You can naturally regulate your senses simply by practicing Krishna consciousness. So, Dhyana Yoga is about restraint. Bhakti Yoga is about engagement of the senses. So it's very difficult to restrain one's senses and mind. It is very easy and natural for us to engage one's senses and mind, but it should be directed towards Krishna. Anything that is directed towards Krishna, Srila Prabhupada is saying, automatically you achieve the same goal that it takes yogis, perhaps even not even one life, many lifetimes. So his senses, whose senses? A Krishna conscious person's senses, being always engaged in the service of Krishna, have no chance of becoming otherwise engaged. Some of you who are attending these classes for several years and who have been practicing Krishna consciousness for many years would have already experienced this. What is that? After practicing Krishna consciousness for many years, you've lost interest in a lot of things that otherwise were preoccupying your mind earlier before you came to Krishna consciousness. So what you thought was enjoyment in the past is no longer enjoyment for you today, because your tastes have changed. Your tastes have changed from material desires to spiritual desires. So you're only too happy to spend 6, 7, 8 hours in the temple on a Sunday and not worry about which movie you're missing or which restaurant has opened or which restaurant has some kind of a sale or some kind of a promotion or some kind of concert going on somewhere that your friends are trekking to or wherever they are going, because your tastes have changed. So this is a natural outcome of practicing bhakti yoga. Imagine just by practicing bhakti yoga, you've given up bad habits. What could be more natural than that? You don't have to put a, what do you call it, that nicotine patch to give up smoking. Just take up to chanting, you'll give up smoking automatically. So Prabhupada is saying his senses, being always engaged in the service of Krishna, have no chance of becoming otherwise engaged. So at the end of life, he's naturally transferred to the transcendental plane of Lord Krishna. Consequently, he makes no attempt to increase his longevity. So Prabhupada is saying, why do you want to lead a long life? For what? Whatever breaths you've been given already allocated to you, use it up in the service of Krishna. Prabhupada is saying he is at once raised to the platform of liberation as stated in Bhagavad Gita 14.26. Which chapter are we in? We're in chapter 4, 29th shloka. And Prabhupada is talking about a shloka that is yet to come, which is in the 14th chapter. Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. The Lord is telling Arjuna in the 14th chapter, one who engages in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord transcends the modes of material nature and is immediately elevated to the spiritual platform. A Krishna conscious person begins from the transcendental stage. Begins from the transcendental stage. So the minute you utter the word Krishna, you're already on the transcendental path. And he is constantly in that consciousness. Therefore, there is no falling down. And ultimately, he enters into the abode of the Lord without delay. The practice of reduced eating, which is the first half of the 30th shloka, which Srila Prabhupada has combined here. The practice of reduced eating is automatically done when one eats only Krishna Prasadam, or food which is offered first to the Lord. Reducing the eating process is very helpful in the matter of sense control. And without sense control, there is no possibility of getting out of material entanglement. So to learn to control your senses through the practice of Ashtanga Yoga is very, very difficult. Because you have to exercise a tremendous amount of willpower to even get to that pranayama stage. First, you have to learn to follow basic rules and regulations. Then you have your asanas. Then you have to actually get to that pratyahara stage to become detached from things that are external to you. But the process of Krishna consciousness is very direct. It saves you time, it saves you the hassle. And the best part is Krishna is the driver of your chariot. He's in control. This is what we want. So that's why you notice the theme throughout the Bhagavad Gita in the purpose as well as in the translation of some of the shlokas. Srila Prabhupada repeatedly brings Bhakti Yoga to the forefront. Because in Kali Yuga, this is the Yuga Dharma, chanting the holy names of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And if you chant like this endlessly, all your bad habits will disappear on their own without you even having to exercise your willpower other than to be determined to chant the holy names of the Lord. Other than that one bit of determination and a little bit of faith, you are already on the transcendental path. You are going to Krishna for sure. That's what Krishna himself is saying. So we'll do the last shloka for the day. Sarvepyete yajnavido
Sarvepyete yajnavido
yajnakshapita kalmashaha yajnashishtamritabujho yanti brahma sanatanam. Sarvepyete yajnavido yajnakshapita kalmashaha yajnakshishtamritabujho yanti brahma sanatanam. Sarvepyete yajnavido yajnakshapita kalmashaha yajnakshishtamritabujho yanti brahma sanatanam. Word for word meaning and translation. Sarve, all, api, although apparently different, ete, these, yajnavidaha, conversant with the purpose of performing sacrifices. Yajnashapita, being cleansed as the result of such performances. Kalmashaha, of sinful reactions. Yajnashishta, of the result of such performances of yajna. Amrita bhujaha, those who have tasted such nectar. Yanti, to approach. Brahma, the supreme. Sanatanam, eternal atmosphere. Translation: all these performers who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions, and having tasted the nectar of the results of sacrifices, they advance toward the supreme eternal atmosphere. So Krishna is concluding the benefits of performing these 12 different types of sacrifices. Obviously, when you perform these various types of austerities and you've got a taste of the results of some of these sacrifices, your determination to continue down that path increases. So Krishna is saying you are actually advancing to that supreme eternal atmosphere. And by performing all of these sacrifices, your sins are also being cleansed. Purport. From the foregoing explanation of different types of sacrifices, namely sacrifice of one's possessions, study of the Vedas or philosophical doctrines, and performance of the yoga system, it is found that the common aim of all is to control the senses. So ultimately, Krishna is saying, why do we perform all these austerities? For what? Ultimately, we perform the austerities because we are trying to control our senses. Sense gratification is the root cause of material existence. Desire is what has caused you to take birth. Desire to gratify your senses separate from Krishna. Therefore, unless and until one is situated on a platform apart from sense gratification, there is no chance of being elevated to the eternal platform of full knowledge, full bliss, and full life. Satchidananda. This platform is in the eternal atmosphere of Brahman atmosphere. All the above mentioned sacrifices help one to become cleansed of the sinful reactions of material existence. By this advancement in life, not only does one become happy and opulent in this life, but also at the end, he enters into the eternal kingdom of God, either merging into the impersonal Brahman or associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So, one aspect of performing these as austerities is purification. Purification of your consciousness. The second benefit that Krishna is talking about here is liberation. But there are two kinds of liberation. There is impersonal liberation, and then there is personal liberation. Impersonal liberation means you are entering into Brahma Jyoti. Personal liberation means you are entering into the Vaikuntha planets or the Goloka Vrindavan planets. But we must remember that not all yajnas actually lead to liberation. Why? They actually don't lead to liberation because not all yajnas are done with that same degree or level of sacrifice or yield the same speed of results. So of these 12 different types of yajnas that we've discussed, each one of them have their own time and rhythm with which you get the results. Because one is the aspect of the yajna itself, the other one is the doer of that yajna, because what is your commitment level? So different levels of sacrifices are observed by different levels of people with varying levels of consciousness. So the higher your level of consciousness, you're going to be performing higher levels of austerities. You have a higher level of commitment, perhaps because you exercised that in your previous life. So here, ultimately, what is Krishna talking about? Krishna has talked about 12 different types of austerities, yajnas, to purify yourself. So in one sense, these sacrifices are literal. In another sense, these sacrifices are also metaphorical. Literal in the sense, for example, paying taxes after earning, working hard for 10, 12 hours a day, and 30% of your paycheck goes to the government, or whatever percentage goes to the government. That's a sacrifice. That's a sacrifice on a material plane that we experience. Similarly, to perform sacrifices on the spiritual plane, not all of us are competent to perform spiritual sacrifices. And therefore, if you remember in, I think in the previous purport that we read, or the two purports before, Srila Prabhupada says Krishna consciousness is the easiest thing, but then one needs the mercy of the Supreme Lord. To receive that seed of bhakti, it means the Lord has granted you that seed through the offices of the spiritual master. So the metaphor here is that in any sacrifice, we offer something dear to us in order to get some result that is dear to us. So sacrifice means giving up something that is dear to you to get something else that is going to be even more dear to you. But the highest form of sacrifice is offering something that is dear to us to someone who is even more dear to us, in this case, Lord Krishna. And therefore, the highest type of sacrifice is to offer your consciousness itself to Krishna. You're offering your consciousness that is very dear to you to someone who is even more dear to you. That is the Supreme Lord. And the easiest way for us to offer our consciousness to Krishna, which is the ultimate surrender, which is your ultimate Atma Nivedanam, your body, mind, speech, everything engaged in the service of Krishna, is done through mantra meditation. So that is the most important takeaway from the purports today, is that we have to offer something that is very, very dear to us to someone who is even more dear to us, which is the Supreme Lord. What is dear to you is your consciousness, your pure self. And when you offer your pure self to Krishna, through the process, through a very easy, sublime process of mantra meditation, then you are already in that Satchidananda state. You're already enjoying yourself with Krishna. One doesn't necessarily need to be physically in the Vaikuntha planets. Of course, that kind of enjoyment is really nice, to go back to our original home. But great self-realized souls who have resided on these earthly planets have experienced this transcendental bliss, like Srila Prabhupada. So this is the highest metaphorical form of sacrifice. Some of the sacrifices are literal. Here, the sacrifice is to sacrifice your consciousness. We'll stop here for the day. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take it.